Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Unvarnished Football. I'm Michael Jackson of the Game Before the Money, and joining me as always, Upton Bell, former Colts and Patriots executive, also son of Philadelphia Eagles founder and NFL Commissioner Burt Bell. Upton, training camps are underway. Let's talk training camps then and now. What do you see as the biggest
Wow.
change between
Wow.
training camps then and now?
Do they hit anybody today? I mean, I hate to sound like an old timer saying no, those people better get out there and start hitting because that's what the game was. Well, let me tell you what the game was like. In 1946, my first training camp, uh, other than my father's as a kid, in 1946, the Chicago Bears, the Monsters of the Midway, was my first training camp with George Papahalis, with one of the great coaching staffs of that time, two of them Hall of Famers. But the big difference then, players were in pads in the morning. Players practiced in the afternoon in pads. They hit practically every day of the training camp that I was there for over a 2 week period leading up to the Chicago All-Star game. What was the big difference? You could tell the intensity. A lot of these players were coming back, Michael, from the Second World War in 1946. Many of them thought this was kind of child's play, although it was tough. Child's play compared to, as one player said to me, it beats killing people. And that's the way it was looked at. Some of the great quarterbacks like Sid Luckman, also a great Bear and Hall of Famer. Some of the other players, George McAfee went to the Hall of Fame. Ken Cavanaugh went to the Hall of Fame. Bulldog Turner went to the Hall of Fame. Ed Sprinkle went to the Hall of Fame eventually. But you would never know it at this training camp. Nothing particularly stood out as far as one player being favored over another. It was just the way it was. Now, eventually, going on to my own experience at the Baltimore Colts when I eventually became personnel director, training camps then under, first of all, Weeb Eubank and then under Don Shula were still very disciplined. But the difference, again, comparing it to today, was in the morning, yes, the players usually came out in what they call shells, which was they weren't in full uniform. But every afternoon, there was hitting. There was eventually scrimmaging. There was what they called the one-on-one drill, which was called the nutcracker drill. And that's where two offensive linemen with a quarterback would line up against one person, usually a linebacker, and they would attempt to take the linebacker or the defensive back, whoever it was, out of the picture, and then the quarterback would hand it off to the running back. But it had to be done between two tackling dummies that were very narrow. I mean, you had no path except directly straight ahead. And the whole idea, whether it was a defensive lineman or in most cases a linebacker, had to fight off those two men and then tackle the ball carrier. When I tell you it was violent, it, forget the violent world of Sam Huff. This was truly something to see, and players on both sides, offense and defense, would gather around just to watch this whole thing. But there was much more hitting. Now, what do you have today? Training camps are totally different, and going back to what it was like then, also you played six preseason games. They called them exhibition games until my father, Burt Bell, as commissioner, years before, said we can't sell them as exhibition games because nobody's going to go to these games. We have to sell them as preseason games. And by the way, most of the games that were played in those six preseason games were played on the road. Teams didn't try to, charge the fans for watching them play at home. So most of the games, all of the ones in the beginning that I was involved in, were played on the road. Nothing was played at home.
Meaning, when you say both teams were on the road, you're talking about they were in towns and cities that didn't have NFL teams.
Correct. I mean, we played in South Carolina. I remember one time we did in 1960, did play at home, and it was the first game ever played by the Dallas Cowboys. We did play them in Dallas, and as proved, they were the home team playing in their own home, and actually hardly anybody showed up. So I mean, you saw what it was like. So we would play in South Carolina, we'd play in Georgia, we'd play games in Miami, we played a lot of games in what might be future NFL cities, but nothing was ever done at home because you knew that people knew, unlike today, that they were paying or having to pay full price to watch their own team play, and yet it wasn't the regular season. I do remember the Colts played one inter scrimmage game at home at Memorial Stadium, and believe it or not, people were so excited about the Colts in those days. They charged $1 per ticket, and
Wow.
they sold it out. They had 40,000 plus people come to watch the Colts and what was really an inter squad scrimmage. So again, what happened in those days? You played on the road. You played 6 games. Uh, the players really played themselves into shape. Now you better come to training camp and you better be in shape. And a lot of the players, and I think there's too much of it, a lot of the players train year round now. They go to these different camps. They get instructions. They have personal instructors. I mean, a lot of things that I think eventually lead to more and more severe injuries.
I want to go back to the preseason games a little bit, and some games were played at home. I think this is important to bring up. Some teams had annual games that were played in their stadiums, but those were charity fundraisers also. So a lot of times you had, I think the Bears had an annual game that they played at home. I know the Packers had the Shrine Classic, which would raise money to help children. There were home games, but they had a charity aspect to them most of the times. Did Baltimore have one of those, or did the Colts play against teams that had those charity games that you remember?
No, the Colts never played at home. The only time, as I said, that they did, because they it really became a bone of contention, and really was one of the factors in the Colts leaving. Carol Rosenblum, the owner, said, we won't play any home games. But what happened was he got a call from Tex Schramm, and Tex Schramm of the Dallas Cowboys, who was the general manager at that time. And again, I want to jump back and say that during the 40s and most of the 50s, with the exception of maybe the 2 games that you were talking about, nobody played at home. Everybody wanted to play on the road, and they understood that this is the way you had to do it. That you didn't want to screw the season ticket holders, which take a big screwing today. And so you played on the road. But in the Colts case, they played an inter squad game. They didn't play any team from the NFL, and they didn't want to do anything to disturb the season ticket holders or the people who would buy individual tickets. So they charged $1 per ticket for anybody that wanted to come in. And as I said, 40 or 50,000 showed up. I mean, it was unbelievable. Everybody in the NFL was talking about it. The whole idea that they would play an inter squad game instead of where we trained out in Western Maryland, where we get thousands of people every day to watch, occasional scrimmages. these people came to Memorial Stadium, and it was an unbelievable. I couldn't believe it, the sight of it. So that's the way it was then. Occasionally, then later in the 50s, the Colts would play a game or two at home. I can remember going down for one with my father, and that was in 1950, was 1959, the year that he died later on, and going to a game there. And they were all well attended, but they charged them hardly anything for the game. That was the big thing. And now what do you have? People are forced to buy them as part of their season tickets. Uh, they're charged almost full price. And, the fan is taking a real screwing. And that's why the NFL, if you see now, it's down to 4 games. Pretty soon it'll be down to 2 games, and then it'll be down to nothing because they're finding out you can't keep doing this and maintain your fan base.
A lot of the talk around preseason games involve injuries, and a lot of players maybe being out for the season or sustaining a heavy injury that's going to keep them out of a lot of early games by something that gets suffered in the preseason. How often did that happen when you were with the Colts in the 60s and the Patriots in the 70s, and then going back to what you remember from your childhood? Was that a common occurrence, especially with the non-contact injuries, that sort of thing?
Nothing like that happened. And that's I think the athlete of today is number one overtrained. I think also look at how many before they even get to training camp. How many sessions do they have? They bring the rookies in, they bring the veterans in, and they bring the rookies and veterans in again. And then by the time they get to training camp, I'm saying, what I understand that the game has totally changed from the days of when I first started watching in the 40s to what it is today. The coaching staffs are bigger, the squads are bigger, the players are, and that's one of the factors that I think, as far as the injuries are concerned, is the players are just bigger, quicker, stronger, faster. They're machines now. And how quickly does the machine break down? More so than ever. Going back into the time that I was with the Colts, let's say starting in 1960, players would play 6 preseason games. Players eventually played themselves into shape. Nobody really came to training camp out of shape, but they didn't come to training camp being overtrained. So they would gradually work themselves into, yes, did we still scrimmage a lot? Did we still have things like the nutcracker drill? Yes, we had a lot of that. Were there 2-a-days? Yes. Were players relieved when it was only down to 1 day, which we usually did a couple of weeks before the end of the preseason, which was the 6th game? Yes, all of that took place. But I can remember even way back in like April and May, players would kind of organize their own kind of workouts. And I went to many of them. We did have a rookie camp when we would bring rookie players in. I remember 1967, Bubba Smith, Rick Volk, a lot of players came in. And we did that. Ted Hendricks, who later on went to the Hall of Fame. Those situations were organized for rookies coming in, but most of the players, I remember John Mackey playing basketball with and against him. One of the greatest, he and Rob Gronkowski, the 2 greatest tight ends I ever saw. We would play basketball late, into the winter, into spring, and then Mackey and 4 or 5 players, they would all get together, in different groups, and kind of work themselves, into shape and getting ready for training camp.
A lot of teams, a lot of teams had a basketball team. I know John Wooten was telling me about when he was with the Browns, having Ernie Davis on their team for 1 year on the basketball team. And I know the Packers had a basketball team. Bill Butler was telling me, and Bart Starr was on that team. And a lot of those players, they would go, again, out to raise money. It would be a charity function. And I'm not saying that current players aren't doing charity things. They certainly are. But that was one way that players were staying in shape and also raising money at the same time in the off season. That was a big deal. Those basketball games, you know.
Oh no, that absolutely. And we, when I first went to the Colts in 1960, Johnny Unitas played. All of the big name players, Gino Marchetti, Art Donovan, all Hall of Famers. The Colts had a basketball team, and they played a big schedule. I'm talking about 30 plus games in the off season, and everywhere we went, I mean, the place was packed. People got to know the players. Some of them were pretty good. Unitas would draw people. Of course, he was legendary wherever we went. But I can remember a time playing because they put me on the team in case somebody got hurt or somebody didn't show up. But I had played basketball at LaSalle College in Philadelphia in the Big Five. And so they would bring me along just in case, they needed somebody extra. I can remember playing at Philadelphia's Conventional Hall before a Philadelphia Warriors game. I'm not sure whether Wilt was still with the team. Wilt Chamberlain was the team at that time. And we played the preliminary game against the Eagles, who had Sonny Jurgensen, who, by the way, was one of the best shooters I've ever seen. And
he did go to Duke. He did go to Duke. He went to a basketball school. So.
Well, and I think he did play basketball a little bit at Duke.
He may have, yeah.
You could tell. He and Tommy McDonald, of course, was in the Hall of Fame. But all of the Eagles' best players played against us in Convention Hall. And I can remember making a couple of baskets. That was it. Also, we ended up playing, half the players left, or most of them left. We played in Hershey when Wilt Chamberlain broke the record for 100 points in a game. They all left like at halftime. The Warriors weren't particularly that good. They all went to have some beers and something to eat, and I was to join them later on because we had what they call the Colt station wagon that took us all over the place. I was to meet them later on. They left at halftime, and I stayed for the game and saw Wilt score his 100th point.
Wow, that is amazing. That is amazing. And that was that the same game that Sonny Jurgensen was in before that game?
No, that was
that
different.
a different?
That was different. As I said, we played everywhere. But you're right. I mean, there was a real feeling between our players and I think other NFL teams, as you point out, the Packers. That was a way to solidify to the fans. Now you can't even get near players. Everybody, and that maybe is something for a future show, where I really believe that the athlete no longer is really involved with the fans, only from their cell phones, is that the minute that you got into social media is the minute, as far as I'm concerned, other than the normal BS, that the relationship between the player and the fan ended.
One other thing I want to talk to you about, changing subjects regarding training camps. Right now we've got you got a 90 player limit coming into training camp. In the 60s, I don't believe there was a limit. I think that started later. I know that the Cowboys were notorious for bringing in all kinds of people. Drew Pearson told me he got signed in 1973, I think, as a free agent. He was undrafted, and he told me how excited he was, and then he got to training camp and he found out there was like 100 other guys that were exactly in his same
That's the
position.
Cowboys.
You know, so were the Colts doing that too? Was it bringing in a whole bunch of people? I know the AFL teams, they brought in all kinds of people, especially in the early years to try out. Were there enormous size tryouts at the
No,
beginning?
no, we didn't do what the Cowboys did, and I always believed and found out later on because I tried it myself when I got to the Patriots. The Cowboys actually had what we would call an ROTC unit, which is what they maintained in the off season, or not in the off season. Once they got to the regular season, they would have these phony, ROTC units and stuff like that. And somebody from the league office went in and because they would stay at a motel far enough away from where the team regularly practiced. I tried this and got caught, as well as they did. They did too. The Cowboys would try anything. They were incredible. I mean, they're in front of everybody in many ways, including, in my opinion, cheating. So we didn't have a lot of that. One of the things, and I ended up in Alex Hawkins, the original Captain Who of the special teams of the Colts. He wrote a book on all the different things. What would happen is basically when we went on the road, we Eubank started out with it. They would take me, even though I was starting out working in the ticket office after training camp, they would take me on the road with them. And if any rookie or any player came in and said, asked for a tryout, in those days, when teams went on the road, at least my experience with the Colts was, you went on the road, people would flock there asking for a tryout. I remember being in San Francisco and a group of players, wherever they came from, asked for a tryout. This was actually in November or December, and we were playing the 49ers on the road. And so one of the players, his name was Bill Baird, said he'd like it if they would take a look at him as a defensive backs. So we Eubank said, well, we'll have you line up and run against Upton Bell. And so I had run track in high school and college, and particularly in high school, and was the sprint champion. So they had me run the 40 against Baird. It's the only time I ever lost a 40 on the road or against any type of tryout free agent. It's the only time I lost, and to Bill Baird by a hair. I think I ran a something like, and I was running it in sneakers.
Mm-hmm.
Baird ran like a 4.6, and I think I ran almost a 4.6 myself. Ironically, 3 years later, the starting defensive safety for the New York Jets that beat the Baltimore Colts in 1968 was none other than Bill Baird. The only guy that ever beat me. Eubank remembered it when he was fired by the Colts and then eventually took over the Jets. He remembered Bill Baird, and Bill Baird was a damn good safety, at least in the AFL. He was the starting safety. I remember looking down and saying to myself, "Oh my God, that's the only guy that ever beat me." And now he's going to beat the world champion Baltimore Colts. What a difference things make.
Now, back then, there were a lot of free agents that were signed and brought into the camp, as there are now, because the draft is smaller. There are only 7 rounds.
Well, there were 25 rounds. Remember, Raymond Berry, I believe, was taken on the 22nd round. It was a totally different game then. Now, remember, too, even between the AFL and the NFL, there were only 26 teams separately of 2 different leagues. Now you got 32 teams, and to me, 16 of them, you could forget them. But to be a free agent then was totally different. Now there's no such thing. And you had rounds and rounds of players. I found Preston Pearson, I think, on the 16th or 17th round as a basketball player, ended up playing, including the Cowboys, with four different Super Bowl teams. So then you really had a chance to find a free agent. And now occasionally you might, but the way that the scouting system is set up, I mean, there is no stone unturned. The problem is there are too many unturned stones that turn out to be stiffs.
How many people that you saw come into Colts and Patriots camp? Was there somebody who really kind of faced the longest odds, you thought, and that surprised everybody by making it? Is there a player you can think of right now that really at first you thought, oh, there's no way this guy's going to make the team, but then he turned out to be quite a contributor?
Well, I took a flyer, as I said, on Preston Pearson, and I thought, I remember talking to Chuck Noll, who had come over from San Diego as our defensive, what you would call him, coordinator to the Colts. And I remember trying to talk to him. I'm saying, Chuck, I know he's not played any football at all. I saw him play basketball. I liked the idea that he was a terrific defensive player. He wasn't a particularly good shooter at Illinois. He was a really dogged defensive player. I said, I know it's a long shot. I said, but I really believe this guy might have a chance. I said, I'm not counting on it, but I kind of tried to get Noel ready for this guy because I'm sure that Chuck, who was one of the messenger guards for Paul Brown, he was really a brilliant coach, but he also was very tough to convince. You had to really convince him of things, and so I would continue to keep talking up Preston Pearson, and ironically he did start off as a defensive back, but he ended up being a running back, and so to me that was really a great moment for me, and I think of all the people that I drafted, that he was played like an afterthought. In fact, it's funny, I got a call from a writer, I don't know, it was from Wisconsin or Illinois, and said, why would you, more or less I'm paraphrasing, why would you do something dumb like that? I hung up on the guy. So that to me, just off the top of my head, would be the guy that I thought, no football experience, probably like a Cornell Green with Dallas, no football experience, but and not a big name anywhere. People, I wouldn't say were shocked. They said, "Who the hell is this guy?" And he turned out to play on four Super Bowl teams.
Over your time from 1960 through the mid 70s, even when you were an owner with the Charlotte Hornets, what was the biggest change that you saw for training camps during that stretch of time?
Well, I would have to carry it on to today because the big thing is that we didn't have a lot of injuries. In spite of all the scrimmaging, we didn't have a lot of injuries. I think the big difference is the players, how much bigger they are, how much faster they are, how much stronger they are. They're and that's where, again, going back to what we were talking about, that's where the injuries really became, more and more prevalent. Is that even though you were scrimmaging less, unlike the days that right into the 70s, the biggest change is the size, the speed, even the intelligence of the players. But yet, the great irony is, why is it today that they are more injured than ever?
You bring up a great point. And a lot of people will say they don't get enough conditioning. during the preseason, and they get into games and they're not prepared for them.
Well, I think there has to be more hitting. I think that were me and I was running a team, and I know everybody wants to keep up with everybody else, but I'm not sure how. I know that some of them are mandatory, some of them not. I don't know how many times. I might bring the players in 2 or 3 times, including a rookie training camp, but I wouldn't have any hitting. But then once I got to training camp, I would probably. I mean, the Patriots have been in training camp since last Saturday, and the first time they will hit is tomorrow. Well, I can remember even at the Colts camps, you were kind of you knew by the second or third day you were going to be hitting, and eventually you would have scrimmages. But that isn't true. So I think once they get into the season, I'm not surprised, even in the preseason, but once the early games, it doesn't look like teams are ready to play. And it looks like, you see, you see the tents now. They never were tents, and I think the idea of tents where if a player gets hurt, he immediately goes into the tent, and then the doctors decide whether he can go back into the game or not. I think all of that is really good. But why do you have the tents? Other than the importance of checking for concussions, you didn't really need tents, going all the way. I'm going into the 80s, because basically guys weren't getting devastatingly injured like they are now. But if you want to put your finger on something, particularly in the early games of the year, is that how many of these guys have really, how much hitting have they really had? The Players Association, if they had their way, there'd be no hitting. They want to protect the player, and I understand that perfectly. But football is a game of hitting. If you're not used to hitting somebody or getting hit by somebody, then to me, you're just asking for more and more injuries.
I agree with that. And having watched, the first few games of the year, I've kind of noticed, I think this probably last maybe 4 years, probably since the 17-game season started, and they have fewer pregame seasons. And, they don't have the stars playing in the preseason games at all anymore. The first 2 or 3 games of the regular season kind of look to me like I remember preseason games, especially the late preseason games of years past, like in the 70s and 80s. It looks about the same level of football to me. Maybe a little bit higher in the regular season now, but it does kind of have the same feel to me. Is that for you too? Have you noticed that, or is that just me?
Well, yeah, not only that. First of all, how long can they keep getting away with screwing the public? When it used to be that by the third or fourth game, well, I can remember when we played the All-Star game in 1960, after Unitas won and the Colts won back-to-back championships in 58 and 59. The All-Star game, I remember Weed Eubank saying before the game to the players in the locker room, "All right, guys, we're going to get you in there. You'll play a quarter, maybe a quarter or so, and then we're going to get you out of there." And Weed was a stickler on. He said, "I don't want any injuries." He always said that. "I don't want any injuries." So Unitas would play. I mean, to give the All-Star crowd, the huge crowd that would show up for these games, Unitas would play maybe a quarter, and that would be it. They get them the hell out. So in their early preseason games, the players would play maybe a quarter, then a half, and then by the sixth preseason game, they would play almost the full game. And then again, we would say, "All right, get in, get out, no injuries." And that's the way it was. Now, you're playing nobody hardly, and your fans. And let's face it, you still need a live audience. Your fans are taking a screwing because they see nobody. Maybe occasionally they'll see here the Patriots Drake May near the end, getting ready for the regular season. But because the Players Association and the owners, to a degree, have agreed upon this, you're exactly what you're seeing. You know what I said? I say to people when they say to me, "Well, what do you think about the first game?" I say, "Call me up, call me when they play the fourth game, and I'll tell you what I think," because that's what you get. But it's under full regular season prices that you pay to watch it, and of course on television, it's the regular season. I don't think it is.
Yeah, I agree because when I'm watching some of the first couple, at least the first two games, and sometimes even into the third game, there are some starting quarterbacks and starters at other positions where you can tell they're just starting to get their feet wet and getting used to the speed of the game again. And I think those kinds of things got worked out in the preseason during playing preseason games in earlier times where they just got used to the rhythm of the game again and what they were doing and getting the subtleties like the preciseness of patterns, the timing, things like that in game situations. I think in the early games of the season, like you said, by week 4 they've got that stuff worked out. But first couple of weeks, things are looking pretty rusty to me. Some teams more than others.
Well, you know something that you're going to see more and more of to get around all of this: joint practices. Now, there will be hitting and scrimmaging in joint practices. For instance, the Patriots have two this year, and they played, and it's going to be interesting to see A.J. Brown go back against his old team. They have two joint practices with the Philadelphia Eagles, and you're going to see more and more of that because it's a way to get into not only your part of your preseason, but also they'll be hitting in, like, usually they wait to hit on the second day. They have the joint practices, offense and defense, of both teams going against each other. I think that these will eventually replace preseason games where you get down to two, maybe one preseason game, and that's it. I kind of like the idea because I think you learn more by scrimmaging, and occasionally we would do it joint. Well, we didn't call it joint practices. We would have a scrimmage. I can remember the Colts and the Redskins, and so we would do that occasionally. Now I think you're going to see more and more of that, and less of the preseason games because the NFL can't continue to get away with it. Now, on the other part, that is, to me, not to the general public, but to me, really disconcerting is where are these opening games when players, according to what you feel, and I do too, where are many of these opening games being played? Melbourne, Australia? Are you kidding me? So you're going to get you're going into your first regular season game, and you're going to get on a plane. You're going to fly 8 to 10 hours. You're going to get there. You're going to get off the plane. Maybe have a day or two to get acclimated, which ain't enough. And then after you play the game, if you're injured, particularly, you're going to get back on a plane and fly back for 8 to 10 hours, and then get ready to play. You're off for a week, and then get ready to play 2 weeks later. I know what Goodell and the owners want, and they want to play. They want it to be known as second only to soccer, which in this country, the NFL football is by far the biggest thing. and will continue to get big if they don't screw themselves, is that they want to, they're going to play in Paris. They're going to play, they're going to play all over. London's nothing, no big deal anymore. And some teams are going to be required to play Munich, Germany. They're going to be required to play on the road twice. And by on the road, I mean going into another time zone. So that even though they're spreading the gospel around the world, they want to eventually play in Beijing. That's of course if China hasn't finally defeated this country. But that's where it's going. And so you're getting on a plane, you're going to these places, you're not quite ready to play because you haven't done that much scrimmaging in the preseason. So what do you expect? This is the future. This is what it is.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Unvarnished Football. Be sure to check out unvarnishedfootball.com. Also, please check out thegamebeforethemoney.com. Upton has his own website as well, uptonbell.com. And there's the Upton Bell collection at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. You can find that online easily. There's a digital collection available for you to peruse from your computer, laptop, tablet, whatever you choose. And thanks, everybody. We're looking forward to football starting, and we'll come back at you. Have a great week, everyone.